Years ago, I was reading a book by a psychologist named Henry Cloud. And in that book, he wrote something that I wrote down in my journal that has really stuck with me for the last 20 years or so. And it was this idea that the way we look at relationships, oftentimes we look at it as kind of a math formula. And the way that we look at it many times is this idea of one half plus one half equals a whole. So it's this idea that we have a soulmate or someone to complete us, as Jerry Maguire made famous, that there's somebody out there that they're supposed to complete us, that I have my half and I bring my half to the table and my half into the relationship. And then there's someone else, my soulmate, my partner, my spouse, who brings their half into a relationship. And they, in a sense, complete me. And then together, somehow we make one great relationship. But Henry Cloud in the book said that one of the really faults of that logic is that if you're going to put relationships into a formula, that they're not additive, but that they're actually multiplicative, that you multiply one another. And so if we take that same equation and we have this idea of one half, instead of plus one half, it's one half times one half, what we end up with is 1/4. And the reality is, this is how a lot of relationships end up operating. That when you approach it as, I'm looking for someone to complete me, I'm looking for someone to fill some need or some lack that I have in my own half, then you end up multiplying that when someone else brings their half. And so then the end result is usually pretty toxic and pretty destructive, and no one ends up being happy because you're ending up with less than even what you started with. And that's what you get when you have one half times one half. And so Henry Cloud talks about that what healthy relationships look like is where you have a person who brings their whole self. They take responsibility for their own spiritual health, their own emotional health, their own mental health. They take responsibility for their whole self. And so you bring one whole person into a relationship and you multiply that by another whole person by one, because they're bringing their whole self and they see themselves as responsible for their own mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. And when you take one times one, that equals one. That equals one healthy relationship. And so for us, though, many times, again, we operate in this complete me, you have to meet this need in me kind of thing, or else I can't be happy mentality. And it comes out of this formula that's best represented by one half plus one half equals one. But the struggle with that, when that's the filter we bring into relationships, one of the major faults of that is I look at someone else as being responsible for my happiness. That I look at someone else as their responsibility to complete me or to fill some sort of need in my life. And then when I don't get it, I can feel entitled to it. I can feel like I deserve it, that I'm owed it because we're in some sort of relationship. Here's what you owe me. We agreed, we're in this relationship, so you owe me this. I deserve this. I'm entitled to you completing me. And then if I don't get it, either you must be the wrong person or something's wrong with you because you're not completing me the way that I deserve to be completed. And when we don't feel like we're getting what we're owed or what we deserve, we can do all sorts of different things to try to get it. Toxic things in relationships where we can start to manipulate the other person. We can start to maybe sometimes intimidate them. We could yell at them. We can try to shame them, make them feel guilty because they're not giving us what we think we're owed, what we think or we're convinced that we deserve. We come up with all sorts of other manipulative. Sometimes they have really positive spins on them. Sometimes like romance, that when romance has strings attached to it, that I'm going to do this for you to woo you or to impress you or to shower you with praise, but really it's so that I get something in return. It's because I want to get something from you that I do these different types of things because I feel like I'm lacking. Your job is to complete that for me. And the thing is, we do this in so many areas of life where we have social contracts. Maybe you've experienced this before where maybe you went to a restaurant, even here during the pandemic, and you order takeout food and you get home and you realize that the takeout order is completely wrong. I mean, they botched everything. And so you're frustrated because you don't want to drive back out. You don't want to have to go through all that hassle. You're frustrated. And so you call, and your hope is that they're going to take care of you, because there's kind of this social contract in play that you've made a contract, you've paid for something, and you have a right to expect that that side of the contract was fulfilled. And so if you don't get what you think you deserve, if they don't give you your money back, if they don't go above and beyond to be apologetic and say, here's a gift card for you, or we're going to make a free meal, we'll make it right, whatever they're going to do to make it right, then you're like, okay, well then who else do I need to talk to? Because if you're not going to make it right, then I need to talk to the manager. If the manager's not going to make it right, it's like, okay, who do I need to write a letter to? Do I need to write the corporation or whoever? Because I feel like I'm owed something, that I'm entitled to something. I paid, and there's an expectation here, and you're not making it right. But the problem is, many of us take that same idea of social contracts and we apply that to relationships. And we make relationships transactional. I do something, and then therefore you owe me something in return. But that's never how healthy relationships work. Instead, relationships operate totally differently. And when we come into a relationship, it is our responsibility to say, I'm responsible for my own well-being. I'm responsible for my own mental health, my own emotional health, my own spiritual health. That I don't demand that from someone else. I don't make it their responsibility to complete that in me. My responsibility is to bring my whole self to the relationship. 1 × 1 = 1. That's my job. It's my responsibility, and I can't expect someone to make it their responsibility and demand that and feel entitled, and just be entitled by that. Now, I wish I could tell you that this was something that I mastered really early on in our relationship, in my marriage with Adrian, but I just didn't. And I fell in this a lot, screwed this up a lot, and still wrestle through it in lots of different ways. But just to help tease it out for you, to make it a little bit more practical for you, I remember really wasn't super early on in our marriage. I mean, we were a few years in, and I started being a pastor, and I was teaching and preaching every week. And for me, like, words of encouragement are really high up there. Like, if you've understood or read about love languages before, the way I feel loved oftentimes is words of encouragement, words of affirmation. And I could finish a presentation or a talk or anything that I was doing, and people could say kind things. And when people say kind things, that really fills my tank, really encourages me. But if I didn't hear it from my wife, if afterwards my wife didn't say something to me about how great it was, honey, you crushed it, you knocked it out of the park, it was awesome, I would start making up all these stories in my head about what she must really be thinking. You know what? She must not really liked it at all. I mean, she didn't say a word about it. Or maybe she's ashamed of me because she thinks that I'm pretending to be a different person on stage than I am at home. And maybe that really bothers her, and she doesn't want to say anything. And so instead of saying anything nice, she won't say anything at all. And so I became desperate for her to say something, and it would just eat me up inside for hours and hours and hours and hours after a message or after I would teach. And so then I found myself trying to get it from her, like trying to bait her into complimenting me somehow. And so I would talk about, well, I just don't think it was very good today, and I really struggled with it today. And but I'm not really doing that, sharing that, being transparent with her. I'm doing it because I'm baiting her to try to give me a compliment. Or, okay, well, now I'm going to talk about other people who said something nice to me today because I want to fish for her. I'm like, this isn't to celebrate something cool that's going on in our life or that God's doing in us or through us, but this is just about, how do I fish for you to say something nice about me, and how do I downplay it? She still wouldn't say anything. Well, then I could try all sorts of things. Like I could do the silent treatment, so you do that pouty thing where you're trying to get someone to ask you what's wrong. And so that I would finally be able to tell her, hey, I've been waiting all day for you to say something and you just haven't. It could just get really weird and toxic. But for me, it felt like oxygen. Like, I am desperate for this. You're my wife. You're the only one who can meet this need in me. And I need you to tell me that I'm okay and that I did a great job so I can feel secure about myself. But friends, that's not my wife's job. It's not her responsibility to make me feel secure. That's my job. But I put that on her for so long, and that I had this expectation, this demand of her. Now, we love one another, and my wife's just this incredible human being. And the fact of the matter is, when we talk about love languages, it's really low on her list, like words of encouragement, words of affirmation. It's probably bottom on her list. And so the reality is, in her world, it's just not something she sometimes thinks about. It's something else. It's not on her radar. She's thinking about, maybe after church, she's thinking about the list that has to be done that afternoon, or getting lunch for the family, or a list of things that need to be done before school starts the next day on Monday. And she's just got all this other stuff in her head. And it's not because she doesn't want to encourage me. It's not because she doesn't think these awesome, wonderful things about me. It's just because it's just not on her radar to express that, even though if she feels all those things. And so I've been transparent with her, and we've talked through this through the years. And there's a lot of times where I know she goes out of her way to make sure to intentionally say something kind and something specific about something that I did or something that I said or taught. But there's still times where that just doesn't come on her radar screen. And what I've had to realize is, you know what? That's not her responsibility. I don't have to sit there anymore desperately hoping for it and clinging for it and then getting upset and frustrated if I don't get it, because that's not her job. And I trust her heart. I know her intentions toward me are really good. I don't, these stories, when they start to spin in my head, that I can just kind of put them aside and go, you know what? That's not how she feels. She loves me. If there's something that was wrong, she would tell me. And you know what? I'm responsible for me. It's my responsibility. It's not hers to make me feel secure. That's my job. And so I have to rehearse that over and over and over in my head still to this day, to remind myself of those things, because that's what healthy relationships look like, where you take one whole person and you multiply it by another whole person, and that then equals one great relationship.